are talking Friday the 13th, Vengeance, also known as Friday the 13th Mythos. This one is directed by Jeremy W. Brown and Dustin Monterleith. And it's actually a fan movie, although it was kind of financed through crowdfunding, so it does have a reasonable budget. We'll come on to that again. So the Friday the 13th as a franchise, as far as I'm aware, is kind of stuck in limbo because it is stuck between some legal troubles between two competing studios. And this is why there hasn't been a new official Friday the 13th movie, as far as I know at least, for some time now. And whether we get one or not, who knows? So what we are left with is fan movies. And I know there has been a number of them. There's the well-regarded Never High Cologne, which I haven't seen, to be honest with you. But here we are talking about Vengeance here. And this is a feature-length movie, and the budget here was around $50,000, which is a small budget, but there are movies that are made for less than this. So it's enough to kind of make a feature-length movie ultimately, and have it look at least somewhat kind of a professional job here. So the story tries to add new elements with the kind of the movie, but before we get into it, I feel I have to have a disclaimer. Because although I watch a lot of horror films and I'm a big horror movie fan, I feel I have to say I am not a big slasher fan, and I have not seen barely any of the kind of the Friday the 13th movies. I've seen like 2 or 3. So I'm coming, and I say this so you understand where I'm coming from. I'm not looking at this through a fanboy perspective of the Friday the 13th franchise. I'm looking at it from a critical perspective, and also just looking at it as a film as a whole. Now, because it is a fan film, I have to give leeway here, and I will kind of be a little bit more kind of lenient than if it was a professionally produced movie. But nonetheless, I will still be kind of looking at it through a critical lens, and we'll discuss what works and what doesn't work. But let's go through the basic story first of all. So this takes place 30 years after Jason was left at the bottom of a lake in Camp Crystal Lake, and we focus mainly on a group of kind of young adults, I guess you want to, teens, young adults. One of them, this girl, her father has gone missing, and she's kind of looking around for him, and she's pursued by her younger sister and her friend, and we have a whole slew of kind of other kind of sort of minor characters. In this movie, they're kind of the murders through kind of Jason are kind of at this point well publicised. There's actually tourist attractions where people are doing guided tours and stuff like that through kind of Camp Crystal Lake, murder history tours and things like this. And there's actually multiple kind of tour guides here. We have competing tour guides. So there's a whole slew of characters here. The element this movie does add to the story is it introduces us to the father of Jason Voorhees, Elias Voorhees. And as far as I know, me not being a huge Friday the 13th movie fan, this is an element that has yet to be officially kind of introduced. But here he is, and he wants revenge for the people who he deems have kind of like essentially killed his family, obviously drowned, been responsible through his son drowning. And we're talking about the kind of the Camp Crystal Lake people who work there through their negligence and stuff. So he's now after revenge through them and their descendants ultimately. But then Jason inexplicably kind of rises from his watery grave, or we're told 30 years later, through, he just does. No real reason, he just happens to kind of like come back to life at this kind of point, and obviously causes mayhem. So let's talk about the positives first of all with this movie. So, I feel if you are a slasher fan, this movie is made for you, because I feel it is made for fans of slasher films, and obviously specifically Friday the 13th movie fans, because there's a lot of homages, I'd say, like, and I have the ones I have seen, there's kind of like, oh, remember that kill from this movie? We're going to do something similar with this one. There's a kind of like a lot of recreations of scenes to kind of remind you of kind of previous kills from the previous movies. Again, this being a movie which is set where people are very much aware of the kind of the history of Jason Voorhees and Pamela Voorhees, etc. You know, it almost gives you this kind of this knowing wink for this kind of now fan base of this kind of franchise. Although in the logic of the movie, they're real killings rather than films. But it kind of has this kind of meta quality because of that. I felt the inclusion of the father figure does add an original element to that. But put a pin in that, we're going to come back to that one. And I've with to say, I enjoyed the performances of our police characters. So there's a few police characters that turn up, and I think they do a credible job here with some acting. But speaking of acting, we have to talk about the rest of the cast here. Now, I would say the notable member of the cast, for me at least, the only one I've recognised is Diana Prince, an ex-porn actress who now is a kind of a horror show host in the kind of the vein of Elvira. But the kind of the way I mention that is there's lots of kind of porn level acting here. The acting for the vast majority of the cast is cringingly bad, unfortunately, and that's why I made the comparison to porn movie acting, because it really just is. Now, because it was a fan film, I just thought maybe they're not actors, they could be just friends of the directors and all this. But I had a look at the IMDb page, and a lot of these people have IMDb profiles and kind of like bodies of work. So I feel at least a majority of the cast here are at least semi-professional actors. But I've got to be honest with you, the acting here was pretty bad. The other issues I have with this movie, I feel on a technical level, and again, you know, I appreciate this is a fan film, but there just isn't the experience on a technical level here. I feel the cinematography sometimes is a little weak. The editing is a little bit kind of choppy here. You'll kind of, you know, you'll transition from a scene and you'll hear like a scream, but there'll be an audio kind of artifact left in there. And I swear there was a scene where Jason kind of moves out of view, and there's a crew member behind him and things like this. So there's some kind of like some gaffes in regards to some of the cinematography, camera placement, that sort of thing. The element with the father, I feel, is a wasted opportunity. For me, and I don't normally rewrite movies when I'm trying to review them, but I felt a more interesting idea for a film maybe would have been to focus on the father exclusively and not have Jason in it, because I just think there's no real reason why Jason is resurrected. He just is. And there's no reason given. It just happens that the father turns up at the same sort of time. But really, he has absolutely nothing to do with Jason. They literally cross paths at the end, and it's very inconsequential when they do. So the actual father side of it, although it was a good idea, the concept is completely wasted, unfortunately. And on the subject of Jason, like I said, I'm not the biggest Friday the 13th fan. I'm not a fan. I've seen a few movies and they're okay, but there you go. But he seems different to me from the movies I have seen. Jason, to me, has always seemed like a bit like a predator, stalking his victims and kind of like being this kind of hulking, unstoppable force. But here, he just seems to magically pop up behind these victims nearly every time. He just kind of like comes out of nowhere and doesn't seem to ever chase anyone. He just appears behind them. And admittedly the actor they've got is pretty big, but he just kind of like seems particularly nimble. I don't know, there's never really any kind of sense of just creeping danger, because he just pops out of nowhere and always behind someone. I mean, it does it a lot. One thing I will say as a positive, I kind of forgot to mention actually, there's a good amount of gore here, and the kills are quite varied, and there's a decent amount of prosthetic effects. So I do feel that some of the effects work is pretty good. But how I remember that, to be honest with you, is the cast here is so big. There is so many kind of characters in this cast. I haven't got a clue who's who, because they've introduced way too many characters, and the ones are kind of I guess central characters, because this movie wants to fill in so many kills. And like I've said, if you just want to watch kills, then great. This movie's got loads for you. But because they filled up so much of the running time introducing random characters. Our central characters barely get any kind of characterization at all, and coupled with the fact that they're not good actors, you just don't have any idea who they are. And we see Jason kind of like pop up behind a person in the dark. Who the hell's this? You know, which one is this? There's so many other characters. They have kind of short roles just to kind of fill up the kind of the running time with various different kills. And like I've said, because I am really not, you know, a Jason fanboy, it just seems like that's in favour of actually having a narrative, actually having characterization and stuff like that. So if you are, this movie is kind of like watching a kill count video, but like featured with some additional scenes. That's basically what it is. It was a little bit, like I've said, to me, I feel this movie will appeal to fans who just want to see different kills. You know, if that's all you require from a movie, then knock yourself out. This one I feel will kind of be pleasing to you because it definitely has lots of that. There's lots of kind of, I mean, lots of boobs in it. There's kind of lots of kind of sex scenes, very typical stuff that you'll have in the kind of the slasher movies. And like I said, I applaud the attempt to have a different concept in regards to this father, but nothing is done with it. What a waste of an idea. So, for me personally, I wouldn't kind of recommend this as a professional movie. As a fan film, like I've said, I think you can kind of be a little bit more forgiving with it, because this is not made by, well, I don't assume not made by professional filmmakers. It certainly doesn't seem so. But I guess it can be enjoyed just for the kind of the visceral kills. But there's no depth in this movie whatsoever. I'll give it a 5 out of 10 because they like I've said, I feel that they've done a job for the fans of this kind of this movie, or at least some of the fans, and have maybe given some of the fans at least what you would want from a kind of a Jason movie. But if you compare this, for example, to the 2018 Halloween, granted that was a lot higher budget movie, but that had a feeling of fear, of tension. Michael Myers seemed scary. Jason doesn't in this movie. He just seems like, you know, a random guy who just pops out of nowhere and chops off some nameless person who we have no idea who they are in horrible acting kind of. It reminds you of kind of like things like Don't Fuck in the Woods, things like that. So I feel, yeah, Jason fans may absolutely adore this one, but I can't look at it through that fanboy lens. I have to try and be more critical. I'll give it a 5 out of 10 because it is a fan film, and I don't feel I feel I have to give it some leeway. But if this was a professional film, the grade would be lower. So 5 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.